Well, it feels like there's been an awful lot of Boris Johnson in the news recently, as that shows, but I really do want to concentrate on the economy this evening. Let's start with the government, shall we? Because a few moments ago, I spoke to the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper. We were expecting inflation to fall, but it's now stayed at 8.7%. Are you still confident that you're going to meet your target to halve inflation by the end of the year?
I think the forecasts that there are out there from the various forecasters still say that inflation is going to fall to that level by the end of the year. Clearly, it's taking a bit longer, but what that actually says to me is that we've got to remain focused on halving inflation, and actually what the government's got to do, the Bank of England has the primary responsibility for reducing inflation with its monetary policy. What the government's got to do for the decisions we take is make sure we help the Bank of England achieve that objective. We won't help anybody if we take steps that cause inflation to rise. So that's why we've had to...
What kind of steps would cause inflation to rise?
Well, it's why, for example, we've had to make very difficult decisions, which you and I have discussed before on your programmes, about public sector pay, for example. It's why the government has had to make fair and reasonable offers to people, but have had to make ones lower than inflation, because if we'd made inflation-busting pay rises, that would have, the forecasters have suggested that would make things worse. We've got to make sure we keep the public finances under control. So that means making tough decisions about how you prioritise spending. So I think if the government does what it has control of and works with the Bank of England, that's how you give the Bank of England the ability to drive down inflation and meet the government's objectives of halving it by the end of the year.
Are you really keeping government spending down, borrowing down? I thought debt was now 100% of GDP.
Well, we're controlling public spending.
Doesn't really sound like it, does it?
We've made a lot of difficult decisions. You know, I set out some
borrowing up
choices.
Again last month.
I set out some difficult choices in my area of transport budgets earlier this year. That's why I've been on your programme a lot talking about the tough choices we've had to make on public sector pay. So I think the government is making those decisions, but it's necessary to get inflation under control. That's actually the most important thing we can do. If we don't do those things, we slow down the fall in inflation, and that doesn't help anybody.
And interest rates, I guess, it's inevitable they're going to go up, right?
Well, I'm not going to speculate on them. That's, we've only got to wait until tomorrow. Those are decisions for the Bank of England. No one welcomes a rise in interest rates, and I don't underestimate how tough it is for people. It's one of the reasons why over the last year the government's provided £3,300 on average of help for every family. A lot of that, obviously, is the help with energy bills. Obviously, as energy bills come down, that help won't be as necessary. So we don't underestimate the difficulty for people. We're not pretending this is easy, but getting inflation down is the thing that will help people the most.
I guess, you talk about energy bills there. Some mortgage owners would think that's kind of the point, right? You had this huge intervention to help people with their energy bills when they were going up through no fault of anybody's and people having to swallow these huge bills. People on mortgage rates, on variable rates or coming off their fixed terms deals. I think we can have a quick look to sort of show how high they're due to go and how painful that could potentially be up to, just the last few days, you can see going right back up to the average interest about 6%, 5.72%. Some people will be saying, this is disproportionately impacting a smaller number of people. Why aren't you stepping in specifically to help them?
Well, look, I think the Chancellor was asked this question specifically yesterday when he was in the House of Commons, and he made the position very clear. If you pump more debt into the economy, you actually slow down the fall in inflation and you actually make things worse. So the best thing you can do is work with the Bank of England, help them drive down inflation. The forecasts that are out there from independent forecasters, so not the government's forecast, still say that inflation will be significantly reduced by the end of the year. That is the best way we can help people, including homeowners who are facing higher mortgage rates. And the government's not pretending it's going to be easy for anyone, but unless you get that inflation under control, actually you're not helping anyone at all.
Now, I just want to talk about this in really simple sort of language, right? I'm not an economist, so I'm just trying to kind of get to the bottom of what's going on in the simplest of ways to help people like me who are trying to get their head around all this, right? So we need inflation to come down, and the way we're trying to do this is to make borrowing more expensive and, as you say, to make sure wages aren't going up too quickly. So in other words, is the aim to make people feel poorer so they stop spending so much money?
Well, it's to slow down the economy a little,
by stopping people spending,
bit,
right?
To reduce spending and then that helps bear down on inflation. And then on keeping...
So that is kind of... That it's correct then, isn't it,
keeping
really,
discipline
right?
on public sector pay, which is the thing the government control, is partly for the direct effect of controlling public sector pay, but also to make sure that you then don't drive up pay elsewhere in the economy, because keeping pay under control is important. And that's difficult as well. You know, people...
Yeah.
We've had this conversation about
so it's
matching...
going to be really
if you do
painful.
inflation-busting pay rises, that doesn't help anyone either.
So I'm just going back to what I'm trying to work out, right? So in a way, it's going to be painful, but that's kind of the point.
Well,
it has to be to get the inflation down.
I said, look, no one thinks this is easy for people, but if you don't get inflation under control, the worst thing is not getting inflation under control, as the Chancellor made clear. So I think we have to stick with the course we're on. You know, we have seen it come down, but it's not coming down as fast as we would like. So we've got to stick with it. That's the best tax cut you can deliver people, is to get inflation under control.
Okay,
but I don't think we're pretending it's going to be straightforward.
Let's have a look at the international comparison year, because we had months of people saying, look, the target is to get inflation down. That's what this government is all about. It's you made it one of your 5 pledges. You've said judge us on this, right? And if you compare the inflation rates in the UK, the US and the Eurozone, I just want to have a look here. UK inflation 8.7%, the US 4%, the Eurozone 6.1%. I mean, it looks a bit like a UK problem.
Well, no, if you listen to the ONS when they were setting out the inflation figures, I listened to them carefully, one of the points they made, you've got to be careful with the comparisons internationally because of the way we've chosen to support people with energy prices, and that actually does make a difference in the international comparisons.
So this is wrong, then?
Well, it does make a difference in the international comparisons. The ONS said that themselves. But look, inflation's been high globally. Interest rates are going up around the world.
Except, I'm not trying to have a go in this interview. I'm trying to get to the bottom of stuff, right? I'm trying to have a grown-up conversation about this.
Interest rates have been...
If there is a UK-specific problem, is it not better to say, this is why, this is what we're going to do about it?
Interest rates
there's a problem in order to fix it,
Interest rates have been high anyway. We've been very clear that inflation has been sticky in terms of coming down. Part of the reason... You know, when we were having all the conversations we've had this year about public sector pay...
Why are they stickier in the UK?
Because one of the reasons we made the point about public sector pay was to make sure we kept pay under control, because one of the things we were concerned about was not doing that would cause a problem.
Why is it stickier in the UK? Why is that?
Well, if you listen to the ONS, there's lots of factors that drive inflation. Some of it's international, and we're suffering from some of those as well. Energy prices, food prices, and things like that.
Impacted by this in the UK.
Some of it's on the effect that pay has in the economy. And one of the other things is, you'll know, post-pandemic, we saw a lot of people leave the labour market, which means you've got a very tight labour market, which pushes up pay. One of the things the government is doing, things that we can control through the Department for Work and Pensions, is looking at helping people who fell out of the labour market to get back into the labour market, which helps then
it's high wages.
Keep pay under control.
You effectively think it is higher wages?
Well, that's part of the problem. If you look at the things that are driving up prices, that's why we want to get...
So should people take a pay cut?
That's why no, that's not what the government's saying. We're saying we want to get more people into the labour market. That's what we're doing through job centres, looking at skills, getting more people into the labour market, and that's how you enable the economy to continue growing but keeping pay under control.
Do you have confidence in the Governor of the Bank of England?
Yes, the Governor of the Bank of England has a difficult job to do. The job of the government and the Chancellor is to work with the Governor and the Monetary Policy Committee to support them to get inflation under control. They're doing an important job. It's a tough job. They're independent for a reason. They have to make these tough decisions. But the government's working very closely and has confidence in the bank, yes.
Why do you have confidence in the Governor of the Bank of England?
Because I think he's making the tough decisions with the Monetary Policy Committee that are necessary. It's never popular to put up interest rates.
But I think the
bank
criticism
has a job.
Is that they were too slow, right? That's a criticism, isn't it?
Some people make that criticism, yes, and there was a decision to make at the beginning about whether inflation was transitory or not. I mean, you may remember Rishi Sunak made it clear when he was Chancellor that he thought inflation was a problem. Actually, he saw that early on.
And you think maybe the government...
One of the reasons why I backed him to be Prime Minister, because I think he knows his stuff when it comes to economics. That's why he wants to support the bank in driving down inflation, because he knows that it's only when we get inflation under control that we'll be able to then lower interest rates and get the economy motoring and grow it.
OK. We'll have to see what happens, but certainly, you know, difficult, as you acknowledge yourself, a difficult few months, if not longer, a few years potentially ahead for the UK economy. I wanted to talk to you about Ukraine, if I may, as well. You were announcing more support for Ukraine. Yes,
so the Prime Minister, as you know, there's the Ukraine Recovery Conference today and tomorrow, which the government is hosting with the government of Ukraine, which is taking place in London. And the Prime Minister this morning set out further support for Ukraine in terms of guarantees for loans. Also, very importantly, an insurance framework, a risk framework to enable the private sector to have confidence to invest. And President Zelensky spoke virtually at the conference this morning. I spoke at one of the sessions following the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine for some of their reconstruction efforts. So the government remains focused not just on helping with supplying weapons and other support, but also helping with the reconstruction of Ukraine and helping them keep their economy going, which I think is incredibly important.
OK, thank you very much.
Thank you.